Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duttons. Today we're studying 1 Peter chapter 4. Let's get started.
Okay. To read this chapter, you need to understand all that Peter is writing about and who he's writing to. So when Peter was writing this letter, he wrote it to people who were going through persecution and trial and struggle, and they're going through hardship. So the gospel, the story of Jesus, had gone from Jesus's disciples to Jesus's followers to then as they were going to the ends of the earth. And the more and more and more they went out, the more and more opposition they got. Because the more good they were trying to do, the more the devil was trying to push back. So these early believers were getting this letter because God was using Peter to encourage these believers to really stay strong and to keep moving forward in spite of their suffering. Now, Peter himself knew a lot about suffering. So he writes a little bit about that. And listen, even after this, Peter will come to know it more. Matter of fact, legend has it that when Peter died in Rome and they crucified him. But Peter didn't feel like he was worthy enough to die the same way that Jesus did. So when they were going to crucify him, Peter asked to be crucified upside down because he didn't feel like he deserved anything like what Jesus got, because Jesus was worth everything. So Peter says, if you're going to crucify me, do it differently than you did Jesus. And so that's how Peter died. Now listen to the way he talks. He opens in chapter 4 by this. He says, therefore, since Christ has suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same mind. And so what he's telling us is that as believers, we need to have the same kind of attitude towards suffering as Jesus did. Did Jesus have to be dragged like angry and upset that he was going to suffer, or did he do it willingly?
He did it willingly.
He did it willingly because Jesus knew that there was purpose behind his suffering. So when Jesus died on the cross, the purpose was that sinners would be given access to God, that Jesus would die in our place. So suffering for us has a refining, changing thing. I'm going to tell you this. The people that I know that grow the most in Jesus are typically the ones that suffer the most. So I know people who grow when they get sick or when they lose somebody they love or when something bad happens, because suffering has a way of stretching us and growing us that we couldn't do otherwise. Now, when you keep reading through this chapter, you'll notice this. You'll notice in verse number 7, he says this. He says, but the end of all things is at hand. And this is where your takeaway is going to come from. But listen, the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be serious and be watchful in prayer. Now, what Peter is going to do, he's going to tell us that Jesus is coming back. And Peter believes that Jesus is going to come back before Peter even dies. And he says, but listen, even if he doesn't, it's shorter now than when we first started. He said, we are one step closer. So, with the time you've got left, you got to prioritize what matters. So at the top of your to-do list, if Jesus is coming back, what's at the top of your to-do list? Look at verse 7. But the end of all things is at hand. And by the way, if he's writing to people who are suffering, how much do you think it encouraged them to hear it's almost over? I think this is probably a lot of encouragement. He says, therefore, be serious and be watchful in what? Prayer. So if the end really is coming, then at the top of our to-do list ought to be prayer. Now, John, what was your takeaway with this?
So my takeaway was verse 7 and 8. It says, the end of all things is near. Therefore, be alert and sober-minded for prayer. Above all, maintain constant love for one another. Love covers a multitude of sins. My takeaway mainly came from love covers a multitude of sins part. And so what I got from that is if we just love each other, so much of the problems of the world would just go away. And yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So if we loved others the way Jesus loved us, do you think we would be quicker to forgive? Yes. If we loved others the way Jesus loved us, would we be quicker to say, give help to people who need it?
Yes, sir.
What about when somebody does something to us and has anybody ever done anything to you and you stayed angry or you stayed mad or you just kept thinking about it over and over? Mm-hmm. If we loved people the way Jesus loved us, here's what it says: love covers a multitude of sins. So because we would love the way Jesus loved, we would start to forgive the way Jesus forgives. Now, I want to end today by looking at verse number 12. Look at it. It says this. It says, "Beloved, do not think it strange when the fiery trial, which is to try you, as though some strange thing has happened." Is a fiery trial good or bad?
Bad.
Is fire, does it feel good or does it hurt?
It hurts.
It hurts. What about on a cold day, if you're far enough from the fire, what will it do?
It'll warm you.
It'll warm you. But if you get close and you step in the fire, what will it do?
It'll burn you.
So fire has the ability, it can either warm you or it can burn you. And it just depends on how hot the fire is and how close you are. Well, same thing like this is about worldly problems. Sometimes those problems hurt us, but sometimes they strengthen us. So it can go either way. Now listen, he says, don't think it's strange when these things happen. Why? Because if Jesus only lived in this world 33 years and he suffered the way he did, well then if we live a good long life, we shouldn't think it's odd that we suffer either. All right? Listen to the next verse, verse 13. This is crazy though. "But rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings." He's telling us that when we suffer, we're supposed to be happy about it. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. But listen, what if we're supposed to be happy not because we enjoy it, but we're happy because of what will be produced in us? Then it starts to make sense. Matter of fact, Jesus' half-brother James said this. He said, "My brothers," so he's talking to Christians. He says, "My brothers, count it all joy when you fall into various trials." He said when. He didn't say if you fall into trials. He said when. "My brother, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience." Well, that's what Peter is saying right here when he says, "But rejoice in the extent that you partake in Christ's sufferings, for when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy." I'm going to tell you, some fires are so hot that we can't be happy about them here. But they can work such warmth that one day when we meet Jesus, they've changed us and helped us in so much that they've grown us in ways that if we just lived the easy life, we'd have never grown in. So even our worst trials can be our biggest helps if we walk through them with Jesus. All right? So tomorrow we'll end the book in 1 Peter and we'll end in 1 Peter chapter number 5. We'll see you then. Bye.